My name is Alan Niven. Some of you might have heard about me, and most haven't. But to amend that, I've written a book called Sound and Fury, and then you'll know who I am and what I do. And what I did brought me to John the Ninja's podcast, which has been an absolute pleasure to be a part of.
Ladies and gentlemen, how you doing? It's John the Ninja live in the dojo, aka the John the Ninja podcast. The gentleman I have here with me is so damn cool. Other than the fact that we both love wearing black, and he also has some tailor-made black clothes made by a legend in the industry. I have to tell you, this man has been all over the world, and he's done things that me and you can only dream of. I know this because I've read several books that alluded to the work that he's done. But I digress. The man has listened to all-time greats. He had no issue growing up in London, England. Sorry, I said London, but he used to look at the lights in London. I'm skipping a bit, but let me get to the point. He used to listen to Miles Davis, Chet Baker, Genesis, Zappa, Foreigner. He was willing to listen to it all, but there was one album that changed his life. This music that talked for the disenfranchised, that gave a voice to those that were fighting for another chance. He was listening to Apache, and the solo by Duane Allman really blew him away. And it's also to mention that his mother was an opera singer and his dad a musician as well. The man I speak of is Alan Niven, this New Zealand-born Englishman who currently resides in Arizona. He started his music career with the legendary Virgin Records, yes, Richard Branson's place. And he did so well driving for them that he rose through the ranks and ended up being one of their main guys, being sent all over the world, from Germany to New Zealand and eventually America, where after which he would take a 2-year break in Switzerland. But the calling to be a producer, a manager, a musician, a writer for all these great rock bands, he would come back to America. And after some time would end up working with Geffen Records, Enigma Records, and working with the likes of Mötley Crüe, Dokken, the Hall of Famers, the Angels, Havana Black, and much more. But he solidified the reputation I mentioned with his fearless anti-establishment force in the industry, with his work with Guns N' Roses and Great White, known for his unflinching honesty, deep industry insight, and poetic sensibility. Man, Alan has lived the life. He's got stories upon stories upon stories, and because of this, they finally have been written down. After years of being told by everyone he knows to write a book, finally, ECW and Simon & Schuster will publish Sound and Fury, containing glimpses of a life rock experience. If you ever read a couple other really good rock books, this one's going to give it. It's got stories from the Rolling Stones, Guns N' Roses, of course, Judas Priest, Clarence Clemons, and a couple others. So here to speak about his amazing life, career, ladies and gentlemen, we are truly honored to have a Mr. Alan Niven. Sir, how are you?
I'm good. How are you this morning? You sound very energetic.
Good, sir. It's that energy. It's the spirit. You told us we're all the same age in the spirit, and I think I sympathize. I might be 28, though. That's where I established it.
The spirit does not age.
I did want to ask, why did you pick 27? Because you tell people you're 27. Spiritually, what about that time frame felt right for you? Because a lot of people are apprehensive because of the 27 club and etc. But 27, 28, that's where I felt like those were good times where, kind of still grown up, but I'm still learning as well.
It's also astrologically around. So we do around every 27 years. Things repeat every 27 years. It's an interesting number. It's both a beginning and an end number. In numerology, it's a 9. After 9, you go back to 1. So it's ends and beginnings.
Something that I did love, other than the fact that you're a stogie smoker too, good sir. I love the brand you got right there.
Have you ever seen a movie called The Good, the Bad, Ugly? This is what Clint Eastwood smokes in his movies. They're called Kentucky Cheroots. And I've smoked these since I was a 19-year-old hippie.
And that's so great that the movie inspired you. But back to the filmography, photography, I always have this love, and it seems like you have an appreciation for all art as well. You've done photo shoots. I love the story where you took the band out to a house after asking the lady if you could shoot, and she had a picture of Margaret Thatcher in the house. She asked if you wanted tea, and it turned out she would fly her on the jet How did you fall into photography? Do you still appreciate the art? Do you still practice it to whatever degree? Because it has changed with technology.
I don't take pictures anymore. I basically stopped taking photographs when Kodak disappeared and we no longer had film. And what you can do with a telephone today is absolutely amazing and stunning. I had somebody come up from Phoenix to Prescott here to do some shooting for a video that we're putting together. And he did the whole thing on his phone. And you could adjust the lighting in the phone, you could adjust everything within the phone. And it's just stunning, but it's, you know, a young person's technology. I liked 35 mil, and that's what I was used to.
I was wondering, a lot of musicians, their past kind of lays the groundwork for what they will do. Your mother was an opera singer, your father was a musician, and when I see and listen to some of your critiques of bands, personally, I may agree, I may disagree, but having the training I've had, especially in classical vocal, I can see where you're coming from as far as like, well, if I was doing it this way, yes, I would definitely agree with his analysis. I wanted to know if you ever dived deep down and wondered, like, okay, I could see how my parents' influence affected the way I conducted my ways in studio and listening and looking for bands.
Well, actually, John, my parents, in terms of their influence, was basically to give me an idea of everything I didn't want to do. My father was actually a veterinary surgeon. He was very casual about playing guitar. When I wanted to learn guitar, he bought me a ukulele, which kind of put me off. My mother had a very formal way of singing, and she burnt all my Rolling Stones singles, and he complained about my Led Zeppelin albums. So I was going in the other direction.
And I love how you were able to see all these greats. You said something, live Zeppelin wasn't it? I found that so fascinating because a lot of people loved them, and I made the comparison to if Zeppelin wasn't good live, but they were a great studio band. Kiss was a terrible studio band, but they could definitely do the theatrics, and those songs hit way better live. I wanted to know your thoughts on somebody that truly, truly blew you away the first time as a fan. When you went and said, oh my goodness, you know, you have that moment where it clicks and you're like, I could do this, or I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Music had the magic, and it had an overwhelming fascination for me. So in that respect, I was a fan of all kinds of music and all kinds of bands. I loved the Sensational Harvey Band. I loved the Feel Goods. I used to go and see them whenever I could. But I was always evaluating. I was always watching the audience and watching the band and working out what worked, what didn't work. The very first time I went to a gig and became immersed in the moment and was not evaluating was the first time I saw Bruce Springsteen at Hounds Odian, which was his first gig outside of North America. And I thought they were fabulous. And Clarence got me out of my seat and onto his Thunder Road.
And we're definitely going to have a question about that from the book, because you do have stories from that. But, you know, there was a statement you made. You said the Congo Square in New Orleans was the place where the true essence of rock and roll was formed. That's where the French allowed the slaves to go and do their spiritual music. And, of course, from there, jazz came. I've always had the recollection that blues was the catalyst for sparking the match for rock and roll music. And of course, everybody, just like AC/DC, but you know, blues, Tchaikovsky, that intermix. Yeah. I wanted to know how you came to that conclusion, because that spot felt way more jazzy to me, and I never made the connection. Of course, music's intertwined, but the connection between jazz music really being the igniting force for rock and roll.
Well, I just see it in a simplistic way. And part of the simplistic way I see it is that the foundation of blues, the foundation of rock and roll, and to some degree jazz, starts with the drums. And Congo Square is the geographical location where African drumming first made its impact on the Caucasian folk idiom. So if we're looking for one place that we can geographically say, this is where it started, this is where it was germinated, this is where it was inseminated, this is where it began, it's Congo Square. And it all comes from there. Blues, rock and roll, jazz, because that's where African rhythms collided with the Caucasian consciousness.
That's a genius way. You know what really stuck it for me was your mentioning of the drums. I was so narrow. I'm not trying to be crazy, but that opened my mind because I always thought of it as the rock music was the guitar or piano, but the drums makes absolute sense. So now that just opened my horizon of like...
Think about it. When you go in the old days, when we used to record onto 2-inch tape, the first thing that you would do is get a good drum track. Now, there were one or two producers who would put their final drum track on last. Mutt Lange did that with Def Leppard. But in general, what you try and do is get a good drum track first that builds the feel that you're going to put on the song. You need, depending on the song, you need a little bit of swing, you need a little bit of this, you need a little bit of that. We always used to start with trying to get as much of the rhythm track as possible. So we'd have guitar and bass as well. But the one thing I would always be looking for was the drum performance. And then if we had to fix the guitar or relay the bass, we'd do that. But the most important building block for me sonically was the drum track.
I always listen to the drums or the bass first, and then the rest of the song I get to enjoy it more once I know how they're anchoring it down. But let's start with something that I really, really loved. You started off at Virgin, especially when they were in their heyday. That is the time where Richard Branson and co. were really making an impact. They were changing the industry. And of course, when history is being made, you really don't know it at the time. You can have a feeling something special is happening, but you don't know for certain. How did you initially land the job with Virgin, and what were your thoughts?
Some friends of mine insisted it was time that I got a job, and I found the idea very unpleasant. I decided at a young age that becoming part of the machine was probably not for me. I was not going to be an accountant. I was not going to be a lawyer. That was unexciting to me, whereas music was absolutely riveting. And one of my friends said, Virgin are looking for somebody to drive a van around and be a gopher. You should go over there and get that job. And I decided, well, it's a record company. That's a little closer to something that matters to me. So I went over there and had a couple of interviews and got the job as being the gopher driving the van. And that's how I started at Virgin. And in those days, we were not on the crest of a wave, and certainly weren't thinking we were making history. We were trying to survive. It was very hand to mouth. The company was not a strong company, and it was not a big company there. There may have been, 24 of us? That was it. I certainly didn't foresee that there would be aeroplanes circling the globe with the Virgin logo on it. That never occurred to me. I don't think it occurred to Richard at the time either. But I was at Virgin in very early days. 1974 was when I started there.
With those names so synonymous to music and business, I read Richard Branson's autobiography, and it just fascinated me. It was just from one thing to another to another. I wanted to know if Chris or, Richard said anything or did something that really set the bar for your expectations for your career, for your life, because they were just, again, winging it, but ended up being such strong and important minds to the world, not just for music.
If I take one thing away from my time at Virgin, and identify that as significant. It's the power of the word yes. And the way it had an impact within Virgin was when something needed to be done and you were asked to do it, you said yes, left the room, and then freaked out and went, how the hell am I going to do this? I have no experience of this. I don't know what I'm doing. But you figure it out and you get it done. And Virgin was very much an environment that if you said yes, then you progressed. It was also a very warm and social environment. None of us were paid much then at all. It was very, very low wages. But on the other hand, our boss would take us out to the local pub and we would have a great night, and he would feed us every now and then. It's a mistake to say that any business is a family, but as much as any business could be a family, Virgin had family feel about it in those early days.
One thing I've noticed, you have been very candid of when you said you made a mistake. There's been other times where you said no to something where, you know what, maybe we shouldn't have, kind of like the first MTV Unplugged sessions. But then there's been other times where you said no and it actually came into a good reasoning, like with touring with the Rolling Stones. Should we do it on our home turf and bank $1 million, or should we, possibly lose and go out with them? I wanted to know because I recently dealt with a similar situation where I'm a yes man. I say yes, I say yes, I say yes, and then somebody had to pull me to the side and say, hey, listen, this profession is not like that. You really actually have to know how to say no more often. Was there a time you said no, and that actually came to be like the best decision you could have made for who you were representing?
Well, using one's experience and one's intelligence, you try and say yes to the things that you see have a worthwhile possibility to them. There are certain things that when you're asked to do them, you go, I don't know about that. I'm going to think about that overnight. That doesn't feel that good to me. In the case of the Rolling Stones, we were offered to open for them, but I was not enthusiastic about that for a number of reasons. It didn't make sense to me financially. It didn't necessarily make sense to me in terms of the band's development. And I had addiction problems within the band that scared the living daylights out of me. And the idea of taking 2 or 3 addicts on the road with Keith Richards was not a proposition that I wanted to take on, because I want my boys to come home on their 2 feet, not in a fucking box. So that was where I was saying no to opening for the Rolling Stones. And as it turned out, it worked out fine. The band got to play their gigs for the Rolling Stones. They made more money than if they had opened for the entire tour, and everybody survived the weekend.
I love the dynamic, the back and forth, the stories that everybody knows. It's been plugged to death, but you working with Guns N' Roses, and the stories that always get me the most is when you have to put your foot down, whether it was Geffen, who was known for being aggressive, physically putting hands on you, which I got to give you a lot of credit. The hippiness in you, man, it's God-given, because I've been like, excuse me, sir, you got to put your... I'm a fighter too, man. I could give you a hug back. And then other times you had to tell the band, not just Axl, but everybody else. And it seemed like it was always a back and forth. You said you didn't want to do it, but there was something undeniable about them. I wanted to know, when was the first time you felt like you established your presence, as in, I'm in charge, you guys have to do what I'm saying. I understand you're trying to work with them, it's a family dynamic, but there's always a moment where everybody recognizes, like...
Well, it might have been a couple of moments. I mean, first of all, you've got to remember that here's the question, John. Why was I managing Guns N' Roses? Quick, simple answer, because nobody else would. Nobody else would touch them. So you got to keep that in mind. And there was one afternoon, after rehearsal, Slash turned around to me and he said, he was asking me a question, I gave him an answer, and he turned around to me and he said, I get it, you're using the mushroom system with us. Mushroom system? What do you mean by that, Slash? You keep us in the dark, you feed us crap, but somehow we still grow. And I laughed at that and I went, yeah, okay, fair enough. There had to be some professionalism, there had to be some authority, and there was a moment when we had a meeting in the Hell House prior to going to the UK for the first time. And Duff asked me, all the band was sitting on a really rank and wretched sofa that I wouldn't go near. And they were all sitting in a line in front of me, and Duff was standing behind it, and he looked at me and said, so Niv, do you think we can do this? Meaning, go to England, play gigs there, deal with the press there, and come back with momentum. And I looked at him and I said, why the fuck do you think I'm here? Of course you can do it. What that tells you, there was a moment when they had a self-realization that they were so wretchedly demented in their behavior at the time that they were a little bit scared about, oh, this is organized. We've got to get on a plane together. We've got to go through customs and immigration. Where are we going to stay when we get there? How do we get around? How does this all work? And there was that moment of self-realization where they felt insecure that they could do it. But my response was, why the fuck do you think I'm here? So you can do it. Does that answer the question?
It does, and it put a smile on my face because that was such a heartwarming moment. You can tell they kind of saw like somebody believes in us. It's hard to think of your heroes or these people in these situations not having the confidence, and that simple statement, firm, was that driving force of like, okay, he believes in us, we can do this. And that shows their respect for you.
When you begin to take responsibility in a managerial position, do you think it's possible to count the sleepless nights where you worry about, okay, where do I get a truck from? Where do I get a tour manager from? How do we organize the financing of this? How do we keep the bus full of diesel to keep rolling? How do all these things get done? And all I would say to anybody who wants to do it is it's one day at a time, one question at a time, one answer at a time, and then one day you find your band are playing Wembley Stadium.
And that's got to be so vindicating as well, to have your band. I wanted to ask, just out of the legends and folklore of when I started in the industry, I was at WMMR in Philadelphia, and my mentor, me and him would go back and forth between this very old rumor. I haven't actually heard it in years. I think it's been busted. But there is a question of, did Slash really play the Sweet Child of Mine solo? I've seen him play it live. I still listen to other guitarists saying, like, I don't know, the way he plays and you can hear it and then you hear the recording. I just wanted to know your thoughts on if you ever heard the rumor and your thoughts of responding to it, or if you just said this is bollocks.
Simple answer. No ringers. All right. I was dealing with bands. I was dealing with people who I thought had the capacity to be artists rather than just entertainers. And one of the things that I noticed when I was in Los Angeles, that there were a plethora of skilled musicians with technique. There weren't a lot of good bands. And the reason for that was all these skilled players would get together for 2 or 3 months, record 4 or 5 demos, shop them around, not get signed, and then they'd all move around to different bands. All right. One of the things that is essential to the formation of a powerful creative unit is time. You've got to play together. You've got to learn how each other plays. You've got to figure out the strengths within the chemistry of the band. And you have to have that sense of commitment to be able to formulate the personality and character of the band. And if you don't do that, and you don't spend the time doing that, then you're just going to be a temporary entertainer. But the great bands are all forged in a lot of gigs and learning how to write together.
When the incident of you being released from Guns N' Roses happened, I had a good man talk to me from Blood Alliance, and he told me that you're so invested in it, to this family, that it could hurt worse than actual breakup. When Guns N' Roses really started kicking off, you just had your first child, I believe your first son, I recount that, and it was a lot of pressure all around, and then to be fired in the way that you were was pretty traumatic. And you said you did go into a depression for a time. I wanted to know what you were able to do to get past it. You take it day by day, you try and deal with it, but it seems that your partner, she was really the catalyst to bring you back to light. It seems like you're a little bit on the same level as me, as having somebody that balances you out really helps you put things in perspective.
Well, when the separation came, it was a surprise, but in some ways it wasn't unexpected. It was something that had been in the atmosphere almost since day one. Had that kind of unreliable volatility. Axel was always complaining, always trying to fire me, and I was committed by contract to 5 people, collectively known as Guns N' Roses. I was not to serve the whims of one, and I have no problem in saying that the success of Guns N' Roses was sometimes in spite of Axel rather than because of Axel. But in terms of my own mental state, it took me a long time to get past it. It took me a long time to get past parting ways with Great White. I think one of the things that I do to a detriment is that when I commit to something, I commit to the bitter end. Whereas more intelligent people would probably turn around and say, you know, this isn't working right at the moment, maybe you should step out of it and get away from it. But for me, management is not an occupation. It's not something that you clock in at 10 o'clock in the morning and you clock out at 6 o'clock in the evening. For me, it was a way of life. It was 365, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And it was a way of life. So the ups were terrific and the downs hurt you as you would be hurt in any other circumstance when you were that committed and involved in something. It's still worth doing.
I remember you stated that when Slash and the guys wanted to get back together and do Velvet Revolver, you were still having mixed emotions about, you know, would this work without Axel? Could you give them the amount of time that they deserved? And you did have other projects you wanted to work on. I was curious what those other projects were, considering that now you had the time.
Well, at that time, I mean, you have to take into account that with Great White, who some people forget, but they rose to prominence and, for example, were certified gold way ahead of GNR. And that had been a project that I'd been involved with since 82 or something, you know, so to get success with them took 5 years. When I'm talking about a band working together to find what the personality is, to find what the character is, there's your example. 5 years of work with that band before we got anywhere. Through natural development, I became pretty much the main writer in Great White, and the longer I did it, the more I enjoyed it and the more I applied myself to learning the skill of it. And all through that period of time, I was also writing for Jack, because it had to be convincing coming through his persona and his personality. And then after Great White, I didn't have to write for anybody except myself. And for a long time, I had no desire to be involved with bands or writing or recording, until one day somebody looked at me and said, "You look like shit. If you don't start being creative again, I think you're going to roll over and die." And I went and looked in the mirror and I went, they're probably right. I don't look that good. And I didn't know if I could write anymore. But once I started writing again, and the focus was entirely from my own consciousness and not through the prism of this has got to be believable coming out of Jack Russell, I got into writing a lot of material, which is still sitting and waiting to be recorded properly. But it's good. Some Australian guys stole a bunch of the songs, made an album out of them, and did very well with it. But at that moment, that was something I was thinking of. I was thinking, do I really want to get involved? And honestly, I was not thrilled with who they picked for a singer for the project, it was called at the time. He seemed to be a bit of an empty fellow to me. And then Izzy disappeared. And when Izzy's not involved, that's enough for me to go, yeah, I'm not sure I want to be involved. Because for me, it's more than just a financial exercise in the interest of ego and bank accounts. There's got to be more to it than that. There was more than that to GNR. There was more than that to in Great White. It wasn't just about being entertainers and how many tickets can you sell off the backs of the songs that you've already written.
And you've been very vocal about the friendship you've had with Izzy and Jack Russell, may he rest in peace. There was a statement he said that threw me off when you and Jack reconnected. And you said he was a different person than he was. When you guys initially split, it was kind of chaotic, as we all know. But you said that he really found himself. He was a different person, and you guys were able to reconnect. And there was a statement, I'm pretty sure I remember it correctly, that he mentioned that he was having an affair with your ex-wife. And in moments like that, I've seen where certain people say, you know what, I had to humble myself so I could get my friend back. And then other people would say I had to forgive them for what they did, and then we could continue the relationship. I wanted to know, when was the moment you said, you know what, I want to hang out with my friend again? He seems like he's really turned around, and he did something that proved like, yes, I'm a different person, and I'm happy to have you back in my life.
Oh, well, my wife Heather and Tony Montana insisted that I come down to a gig that they were doing in Phoenix, which I was not enthusiastic about, especially since I was not certain whether Jack would live if we were both locked into a room together. But I went. Tony needed me there for a particular reason that night. And in spending time with Jack that night, I realized that there had been a shift within him, that he was in a better spiritual place. I won't say that he was religious, but I would say that he had a sense of humility, and he had a sense of all the things that he had done that he shouldn't have done. And he could articulate that, which was a very big progression for Jack. And he was a far pleasanter person to be around. We're both getting on in our years, and he's gotten on in his years completely. But we got to a point where we could laugh about the past. and we could reconnect with a sense of comedy of our life together. And I knew he was ill, and he was not in good physical shape. And I could sense it was important to him that he was in a good place mentally as he was coming to the end of his days. And he wanted a lot of reassurance from me. We would talk a lot on the phone. When it came down to having an affair with the ex-wife, I had to look at him and say, you know what, Jack? Who didn't? No big deal. On the other hand, you and I have created some things that seem to last, which is extraordinary. I mean, if you came into the studio when we were recording in 1986 and said, this will be on the radio in 30 or 40 years' time, I would have asked what you were snorting or smoking. I mean, none of us thought that there would be that kind of longevity to what we were doing. And longevity, if you go into a bookstore, you immediately understand that longevity is down to quality. The books that were written 50, 100 or 200 years ago that we're still buying today have a quality. They speak to us. We understand them.
We got to hit the book. We are talking about Sound and Fury. I wanted to know, when thinking of Clarence Clemons, such a great artist, what was that moment you're like, we're going to pick this particular story? What about that story? You were like, you know what, we have to add that into the book, because his influence is so far beyond the genre that him and Bruce and the E Street Band are of. Like, you can pick anybody, any genre of music, and they'll go, yeah, Clemons. And I think truly that the guitar, the piano, and the saxophone are some of the strongest voices in rock music.
With Clarence, there was the way that he played and his phrasing, which was perfect in a rock idiom. But I think I mentioned in the book that I would go up to Marin County just to bathe in his charisma, because he was just wonderful company. He was a great cook. We'd go into the kitchen and we'd cook up big meals and have people over on a Sunday. We'd go out for dinner, we'd go drinking. He was just tremendous company to spend time with and had endless terrific stories. There's an old saying, beware of meeting those that you admire, because most of them will disappoint you. Clem did the exact opposite. He was more special than I even thought he was from observing him as a musician. He was a lovely, lovely soul, and spending time with him was just a delight.
Was there any other stories that you really had to sit back and go, do I want to put this out? Because while you were creating it, there was a time where you were getting story after story after story, and it ended up happening where it was perfect because there was a limit, and you were blowing that limit out of the water for the words and the restrictions that needed to be appeased. Was there a story where, when you were doing the final editing, looking back and considering, like, you know what, for whatever reason, maybe I should alter, or maybe I shouldn't use this one?
I'm not a fan of rock and roll books, because usually they have the same story arc. Start in childhood and the poverty in the East End of London and how terrible things were when the Germans were dropping the bombs, and eventually we form a band. The story arc remains the same, only the names change. And many, many times people would say, when are you going to write the book? And my reluctance came from not liking rock and roll books. And my reluctance when I tried it was that I found it boring, and I found it tedious, and I found it depressing. So I shelved it. And it was only until I woke up to the fact that if you're going to do this, don't write a rock and roll book like rock and roll books. In other words, avoid a chronological history. It's tedious, it's boring. Just tell stories. Just tell stories as you would if you were sitting at the kitchen table and somebody pours you a glass of port. You tell a story. They give you another glass of port, you tell them another story. You're like an old jukebox in the corner, and the port is the quarters going in. So that to me made sense. And in terms of the stories that were told, one of the things I wanted to avoid was being an armchair psychologist about describing the people that I'd interacted with. I thought if I told the stories, all that would be self-evident. And in terms of what I put in there and what I didn't put in there, I got an instruction from the publisher that I had to deliver 60,000 words, which was like a hammer dropping on me. I was going like 60,000 words. I'm going to be a skeleton sitting at this damn computer typing away. I would like to finish before I croak. But then I found out how to use word count on the computer and found that I had a little bit over 60,000 words. So right then I went, I'm done. Who cares? There's enough stories here. They want 60,000 words, they've got 60,000 words. And of course, I'll be sitting in the car talking to somebody, or I'll be on the phone talking to somebody, and I'll go, I forgot to tell that one. And I forgot to tell that one. But it doesn't matter. I think what is there tells a little bit of a story in itself. And that's the point. And I wrote the book more for the curious than I did for the fan. So I don't spend a whole lot of time talking about tunings or how we reverse the tape on this song or so on and so forth. I just tried to keep it as I would if you were sitting at my kitchen table. I'll tell you a story. How about this one? And that's it. It's just a collection of stories. In some ways, I liken it to an album, that each story is a track, and they all stand on their own, and collectively, hopefully, it's deemed good a record.
I wanted to know if there was ever a yes that you got that meant the world to you. You get thanked all the time, you get cussed out all the time, but there's always a person that says, hey, thank you. And it strikes a little deeper than usual. Was there a particular professional moment in your career where somebody said thank you and you said, I'm doing it?
Izzy gave me a Harley Davidson one day, compared to Axel never saying thank you ever. I don't know exactly how I feel about it. At one birthday, Jack gave me a 44 Magnum pistol, and I don't know if you've ever shot guns, but let me tell you, that is one hell of a gun, a 44 Magnum. You got to have some cojones to utilize one of those well.
As a gun enthusiast, I will say that the big moment. That means he loved you. You were blood brothers spiritually for life. I must end this with the most important question. What is the best piece of advice someone's giving you? Sometimes people take us on the side and tell us something ridiculous like, hey man, rent the tour bus, don't buy it. Sometimes an elder takes us and say, hey, remember, always work out, brush your teeth. But it's something not necessarily that you quote every day. Maybe it is, but it's something where that wisdom always comes to you, kind of like always say yes, but it's something that you hold near and dear that someone told you.
I would say the best advice that can be given is trust your instinct, especially when things become successful. I would say that the loneliest I ever felt was when I was surrounded by the most people who all had their agendas and all had their methods of ingratiation. And you were never quite sure the motivation behind certain people's behavior. And the best thing you can do in that case is trust your instinct if it doesn't feel right. There are people called readers who take a pack of cards called tarot, turn them over, and tell you what's going on and what might be going on. Now, you might find that that's preposterous, that it's ridiculous, but in my profound personal experience, I have complete respect for a genuine reader, because somehow it works. And I've even gone into trying to analyze it through the prism of quantum physics. Why is that card the right way up and it's got the right image on it at the right moment? But to me, it relates to them having an ability to connect to a higher power that tells you something. Now I'm going to take it down to the fundamental. Have you ever had a gut instinct or something in your gut told you something? That, to me, is the most simplistic method of being psychic, where higher power is trying to warn you about something and you feel it in your gut. Those who are more adept at being psychic can be far more intelligent in what they say. But to me, it's fundamentally the same. If you get a feeling in the pit of your stomach, that's higher power saying, pay attention here, you need to think this through. Trust your gut.
Wise words from a wise man. And he's only 27. But guys, I must express sincerely how grateful and appreciative we are, this podcast, to have Mr. Alan Niven. Check out his book, Sound and Fury, out June 25th. I'm telling you, the stories that I've got to excerpt are going to blow you away. If you're a fan of just reading, you're going to love it. If you're a fan of music, you're going to love it. And if you're a fan of being taught and learning from an intellectual, you're going to love it. Good sir, truly was, again, guys, he told me to stop calling him sir. The military and me is crazy. I got to get rid of it. So I'm going to say it like it is. I'm going to say it like I would if we were outside the chat. Alan, my man, it was such a blessing to talk with you. It was such I had to put on the Jimmy. The spirit you have for this music and understanding, I love it. So no more this sir, that sir, no more. We're not there. We rock and roll today. So sir, thank you so much for coming on. It's truly a blessing.
I would like to thank you for your time, your intelligence, your smart questions, and wearing Jimmy is perfect. Let's hope that one day we may go drifting to Jimmy's music together somewhere.
I'll bring the guitar. I'll bring a pick too. We're going to play a couple of fun songs. Everyone else, as I always say, be smart, be mindful. Rewatch this interview and listen to some of the wise words that I also picked up. There's some Easter eggs in there. And rock on. Ninja out!
Okay, do another one?
Yes, please.
My name is Alan Niven, and I'm on John the Ninja podcast. Where the fuck else would I be? It's the place to be.
Woo, baby, you listen to John the Ninja. All your ears are about to go on a vacation. John the Ninja's got what you need.